Zoom. Good luck, everybody. Here you go. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar series, week 4, session number 7 on species conservation and law enforcement. Thank you again for joining, or welcome to your first session of the SADC TFCA webinar series. My name is Lisa Blenken, TFCA Network Coordinator at the SADC GIZ Transpounder Use and Protection of Natural Resource Program. And I'm the admin of today's session, together with Clara Boccacino. Everyone who has their mic on, if I can just ask you to turn your mic off. As an introduction, just go into the chat box, put in your name, institution, and country so that we get to know you. If you have any questions during a presentation, don't hesitate to put anything into the chat box as well. Or if you want to actually say something, just raise your hand. Sometimes our chair will also call you out to just ask your question in person and just put your microphone on. We have 4 presentations today. Originally we had 3, so we have extended the time of this webinar session slightly. But I will let our chair of today introduce the sessions to you. Chair of today is Mr. Cornelio Miguel. He is the TFCA country coordinator in Mozambique for ANAC, who has 23 years of experience working in wildlife management. Before his current appointment, he was warden of the former Nyassa National Reserve, now Nyassa Special Reserve, and worked also on the Limpopo National Park before that. Cornelio, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Lisa. So good day to everyone and welcome to this session. Our session will take almost 2 hours this afternoon, but we'll break it into 2 presentations for the first hour and other 2 presentations to the last hours. And after the first presentation, 2 presentations, we'll have question and answer sessions. So people that have really burning questions, we can have them right after the first presentation or in between the sessions. And everyone will get a chance to share the experience, the questions, and even the answers that maybe come from the presenters and all other participants. So let me not waste a lot of time. The first presentation that we'll have this afternoon is the SADC LEAP strategy and implication for TFCA, in which our presenter is Mr. Chizamoka Manda. Is a professional in conservation and wildlife management. He has a master in environmental science. He worked in Malawi, Department of National Parks and Wildlife for 22 years. And during his last position, he has served as a deputy director responsible for conservation service, which included law enforcement for consecutive 6 years. In 2019, he was appointed as a law enforcement and poaching technical advisor, working with SADC on behalf of 2 GIZ projects: the SADC GIZ Transboundary Use and Protection of Natural Resource Program, as well as a global GIZ program called Partnership Against Poaching and Illegal Wildlife Trades in Africa and Asia. So, Mr. Manda, you are welcome. You can start sharing your experience and your presentation with our participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cornelius. Yeah, let me share the presentation. So, as Cornelius has put it, my name is Chizamanda. In short, Chizamanda. But the long one is Chisholm Soka. Oh. Yeah, so the the presentation is on the SADC law enforcement and poaching strategy. So the LEAP strategy in short, which came as a result of a process, a consultative process from sometime 2012 to until it was approved in 2015 November. And it had taken cognizant of the many challenges. Primarily, it was the rising global illegal wildlife trade, but which also was a trigger for poaching in sites of wildlife conservation. So ordinarily, the strategy, which is a product of member states' consensus, was targeting the issues that were giving rise to increased illegal wildlife trade and poaching. So basically, poor law enforcement, issues of weak legislation, also wildlife crime not getting the attention when it comes to prosecution. But yeah, so, and that which leads to illegal harvesting which were leading to increased harvesting of the wildlife resources. So, so this is a SADC response, but cannot lose sight of the issues that drive this kind of illegal trades. So the demand aspects, the governance systems in protected areas, and issues of poverty amongst our people. And so as a regional response, as I indicated in 2015, the strategy was approved after some 2-3 years of consultation and work, where different stakeholders came together to put in place a strategy which the SADC region would enforce in order to contribute to reduce poaching and illegal wildlife trade. So they mainly targeting strengthening institutional capacities at national, but also regional level, and also enhancing the capacity of the SADC Secretariat to coordinate the activities in the implementation of the LEAP strategy. So as we know, as SADC, there is a SADC treaty, but within SADC treaty, there are a number of strategies and plans, but also protocols. So the LEAP strategy comes directly under the protocol on wildlife conservation and law enforcement, but you cannot remove it away from fisheries protocol and forestry protocol. So you have the treaty. I think it's in a sense it means it also contributes to aspects of regional integration and peace. And conceptually, in terms of the structure, there are 2 committees which make a joint committee. Also the Ministers of Environment, Natural Resources and Tourism, and also of the organ of politics and defense. So it's a joint ministerial committee which oversees the implementation of the LEAP strategy. And within the SADC Secretariat, you have the SADC Organ Directorate and the Food and Agriculture and Natural Resources Directorate. And both of them, they are involved in the LEAP implementation coordination. And ordinarily, the expectation is that at country level, you would have the some focal point of some form, but at the moment, it's not yet there. But so if you look at the chart there, I've said country 1 task force focal point, but that's just a conceptual kind of model for in that aspect. And coming to the vision, so looking at thriving wildlife populations in the region which are sustainably conserved, but the purpose of the strategy is to provide a framework at regional level, but also international level on issues of law enforcement. So it's basically a framework for regional cooperation and regional and international cooperation. And the objective is to significantly reduce the level of poaching and build capacity in the region by 2021. And in the original document, the key priorities were 5, but 1 and 2 have been merged. But since we are still using the old document, the document has not been revised, so I still put the 5. So I'll go through one by one. First one is enhancement of legislation and judicial processes. So it was noted that that should be one area of intervention in the region. We need to look at legislations, that is strengthening legislation, but to provide for minimum penalties so as to remove discretion of the courts. But then that is not enough, so sensitization aspects of the judiciary. But then the case usually is decided on based on how facts have been presented. So also the prosecution aspect is covered there. They need to train prosecutors, they need to have specialized wildlife prosecutors. But then it does not say start there, it starts at the crime scene, so improving investigation and using appropriate tools such as forensic, so that when the case comes for adjudication in court, it is watertight, and then penalties that come out are really deterrent. So that's the first objective, looking at legislation, looking at aspects of prosecution and investigation. And the second key priority area is the minimization of wildlife crime and illegal trade, which now, in a sense, in the revised version, should be part of objective 1. And this one mainly focusing on intelligence. So having good intelligence, informant networks, and making sure that the law enforcement that is taking place is intelligence-led. But then this is an area that also requires funding because intelligence is not cheap. The other aspect is the interagency collaboration. So at national level and regional level. So, but not at national level, not only limited within the scope of the agencies, but going far in the field to ports of entry and exits and the other areas, other hotspot areas. Internationally, linking up with other enforcement networks, exchanging information, for example, even using some tools like the Interpol, I-24/7, and other toolkits that can be used. So this key priority area emphasizes on the need for member states and the region to ensure that these strategies from intelligence and interagency cooperation nationally and internationally are enhanced. Then cannot forget people who live with wildlife, who largely are poor, and criminal syndicates take advantage of them sometimes and employ them as foot soldiers to do the illegal harvesting of wildlife. So this key priority area looks mainly at 3 areas: community-based natural resources, where communities take the lead in conservation, and but they need support, whether from trusted partners, from the experts. They may need some support financially, but it's an area where communities have to be actively engaged, that they make the decisions, but also derive benefits from conservation, primarily on the communal areas. And the SADC region, I think, prides itself for being pioneers in CBNRM. And then transboundary natural resources, the TBNRM, almost synonymous to CBNRM, but this one is now cross-border. So we are, particularly where you have transfrontier conservation areas, expect that communities will be actively involved. Usually they may be the lag behind, but the expectation that they should be actively involved as we develop and move forward with the TFCS. So either the participating countries need to have forums which interact across the border so that they feel that they are part of the overall process in the development of TFCA. And the other component is for protected areas, which basically are gazetted areas for conservation. They need to engage communities in management of the peers. Is emphasized, and the need that they contribute to decisions, but also not forgetting that where wildlife conservation is successful, human wildlife conflict also increases. So making sure that the actors deal adequately with the issues of human wildlife conflict. And the fourth key priority area deals with sustainable trade and use of natural resources. So looking at legal trade that is aligned to international conventions such as CITES, making sure that there's lobbying for trade so that there's a value derived from conservation. Also supporting use, sustainable use, which can be consumptive or non-consumptive, to address poverty, livelihoods. So making sure that mechanisms are in place. And yeah, emphasizing the issue of benefits so that it will really demonstrate that wildlife conservation is a viable land use option compared to also other uses for land. So the benefits issue really need to be looked at critically in the region so that people feel incentivized for participating in conservation. And the fifth, not clear, the least one, is to do with field level operations, improvement and strengthening of field level operations. And this is looking at operations in the field. So looking at supporting ranger operations, making sure that rangers they are able to do their work, the procedures for doing conservation work, also capacitating the managers to make decisions on the ground, reducing bureaucracy. And also we add to that the need for ranger-based monitoring systems or law enforcement-based monitoring systems such as SMART or MOMS. So a whole range of things that happen at field level to ensure that the resources, the wildlife resources, are protected. And so far, going to some milestones. If you look at legislation, I think 7 countries in the region have their legislation category 1 of CITES. So it's an achievement, but that means we still have 9 countries whose legislation is not yet in category 1. Category 1, CITES category 1 means legislation is very good, it's deterrent enough. Category 2, not very good. Category 3, that means they are really not very good. So only 1 country has joined the 6 that were there. Then CASA, TFCA drafted a mutual legal assistance. So that is a positive step. And there are also 9 countries. So in terms of interagency cooperation, cross-border or interagency collaboration, 9 countries have got national task forces, but these are different constituted, led differently from one country to another. But most important is they deliver the mandate, but also their level of execution of duties differs from one country to another. And yeah, also from the reports we picked the very functional joint permanent commissions of cooperation, mostly bilateral. Some countries have formed sub-regional information exchange system, like the 4 countries, Malawi, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Zambia. So there's a law enforcement platform where they exchange information. But also most notable is the SADC tweaks, where 12 countries are participating, which has now got 460 users. This was launched last year in April 2019, so that one is operational. So this is an internet-based information exchange. Traffic is helping on that one, is helping to move with that one. Also, the SADC in 2019 managed to bring the ICTs together to discuss implementation of LEAP. What should be noted is that most member states work with ICPs, donors, and so the LEAP is implemented according to implementation arrangements, is implemented by member states. So the ICPs, the different partners, some of whom maybe are represented here, are very crucial in the LEAP implementation. We have also seen increased collaboration of ICPs in the implementation of LEAP activities. So if you talk of USAID, WWF, UNODC, GIZ, Traffic, KFW, and many others are involved in one way or the other in implementing LEAP activities, and they are collaborating closely with the SADC Secretariat and ourselves as GIZ, since we implementing a SADC project. Also, it has been encouraging to note that some countries managed to have joint cross-border operations, at least 4, from what we picked in the previous reports. And I mentioned about use of, in the investigation, use of forensics. So we like that the African Wildlife Forensic Network, spearheaded by Trace, and you said VUCA now is there. They managed to, they are helping to build the capacity in the region, and a good number of member states are involved in this one. Of course, we know like countries like South Africa, they have got good forensic capability, but most the other member states not so good, and others not even there. So this is a very important development, and already a first responders guide was launched last December. And our experiences and lessons, yeah, partnerships very important. So we cannot emphasize that point. I think the only way to implement LEAP is to have all those different partnerships and synergies in implementing some of the activities. But reporting has been a problem because I think one contributing factor would be that there's no really standardized reporting template. So there's a good implementation matrix, but I think there's need to isolate what member states really need to implement and other partners. Also, we're not very sure whether the member states have really mainstreamed the LEAP into their national action plans. I think it's only an issue of good coincidence that what is in the LEAP is basically most of it is what happens in wildlife management, but I'm not sure whether really member states have mainstreamed LEAP. There's good mention of LEAP from all member states, but to the extent to which they have mainstreamed is not yet known. And to that effect, you just need to mention that there are now talks in the preliminary stages of having a LEAP review. This is the LEAP, we're talking about LEAP strategy, we're talking about running from 2016 to 2021, but it was approved November 2015. And coming to what is in it for the TFCs. So as you know, TFCs, even by definition, they are part of the wildlife conservation areas. And when you're talking of law enforcement and anti-poaching strategy, the TFCs play a very big component of these wildlife conservation areas. So basically they are the source of the specimens. So if there has to be any killing will happen in the protected areas or the other wildlife areas, be it forest reserves or other multiple use areas. So the principle, as you've seen, the principle are what basically happens in a wildlife conservation area. Looking at your law enforcement, the rangers, that would be your starting point. Then you're saying if there's an arrest, you go to the court. So enhancing the court processes, and you cannot forget the communities. And SADC subscribes to sustainable use. I mean, then so if there's an opportunity, there's trade. So basically, the LEAP strategy does really just showcase what happens in these areas. the TFCS. And so they are applicable. So the LEAP strategy is applicable to TFCS in all aspects. Therefore, the expectation is that the TFCS will make a contribution when it comes, let's say, in terms of the secretariat, the requirement perhaps is reports coming from the member states. So some of the information will be coming from the TFCS. And our expectation is that TFCS will be doing much better job maybe than peers that are not well supported, because in most years you have very good support from different partners. Yeah, so basically I think that's all I had in this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shiza, for the good presentation. And I would like to encourage our participants to throw their questions in the chat so that we answer them or can get comments after the second presentation, which will start just soon. The next presentation is on wildlife crime prosecution and education in South Africa and Mozambique status, challenge and opportunity by Lara. So Lara has a background in conservation and international wildlife trade as a journalist. She is a project implementation and communication manager for WWF South Africa KETA program. She leads the KETA programs, support to the judiciary and in South Africa to increase their knowledge and understanding of wildlife trafficking, provide relevant resource and training material, and create lessons with their counterparts in Mozambique. So Lara, please, you are welcome to join and lead us on the coming session with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Cornelio. And also thank you to the TFCA network for allowing me this opportunity to share some of the lessons that we at WWF have captured from our engagement with the judiciary in South Africa and Mozambique. And seeing as this is a TFCA network with participants from all over Southern Africa, I really look forward to hearing from others during the Q&A session what their experiences have been with the judiciary and the judicial systems in the countries that you work. And I think what I share with you today really reinforces the need to enhance legislative and judicial processes that's been stipulated in the SADC LEAP strategy. But before we get to that, it's quite difficult to actually get an accurate picture of how successful or not we are in prosecuting and convicting wildlife criminals in South Africa and Mozambique because of the way that the prosecuting authorities report on convictions. So for example, the National Prosecuting Authority in South Africa uses a trial-based perspective, meaning they only consider the number of cases that went to trial and whether they were, there was a successful conviction or not. And it doesn't actually consider the number of arrests or crimes that were committed. Just to illustrate that quickly, according to the Department of Environment, Forestries and Fisheries in South Africa between January and December, we lost 584 rhinos to poaching, of which 327 were in the Kruger National Park. We had more than 2,000 incursions and poaching related activities in the Kruger, and nationally we arrested 332 poachers, of which 178 were in the Kruger, and 57 major investigations were undertaken in that year. In that year, the NPA reports that 145 accused were successfully convicted and sentenced in 2019, but some of these cases are years old. So when the NPA states that it achieved a conviction rate that year of 95.2%, I'm not sure that it's a true reflection of whether we've been successful in bringing wildlife criminals to justice. Some conservation agencies use different calculations where they incorporate the arrests, a number of successful convictions, And then they speculate that the conviction rate can actually be as low as 15%. So if this is more of a true reflection, then what are some of the problems that are contributing to such a low conviction rate? So the courts and those who serve in them are magistrates, are judges, and are prosecutors. They remain key in ensuring that the rule of law is upheld and respected. But we know that our courts have a lot of challenges in dealing with criminal cases. I mean, I think most of us, when we think of our judicial system and our courts, we immediately think of, you know, they are slow, they're overburdened, under-resourced, with major backlogs in cases. And in the midst of these challenges, we have the judiciary that try and finalize cases as quickly as possible. So to better understand some of these challenges that the judiciary is facing and seeing if there's something that, you know, how can we address some of these challenges, in November 2019, together with the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, the Vukanau program, and the Southern Africa Judicial Education Institute, SAJE, as well as the Mozambique Legal and Judicial Training Center, we hosted a joint South Africa Mozambique colloquium on wildlife trafficking for the judiciary from those two countries. And we had this event in Johannesburg, and it was attended by magistrates from South Africa, from Mozambique. And the purpose of this colloquium was to allow the judiciary to share some of their experiences, some the observations, the challenges that they experience in adjudicating environmental crimes, including wildlife trafficking in the two countries. And we had some great presentations from USAID Vukanau, from Sandparks, and from Traffic to really give the participants a renewed appreciation for wildlife trafficking and the impact that it has at a local, regional, and global scale. And we also launched a revised handbook on the adjudication of environmental crimes, which is a resource that Southern African magistrates use when they need to look up legislation and look up prescribed penalties relating to environmental crimes. So we helped them to also update that handbook with a section on wildlife trafficking. And then it was also just a great opportunity for the magistrates and the judiciary to get together and, you know, strengthen their judicial network. So some of the challenges that they've raised, which I'd like to share with you. First of all, they indicated that for many in the judiciary, wildlife crime is not considered to be a serious crime. It's partly because there is this perception that there is no victim in an environmental crime. And when it does come to an environmental crime, there are crimes that are perceived to pose a greater problem than poaching or trafficking, such as illegal dumping and illegal mining and pollution. And then the magistrates also expressed their frustration and a feeling of disconnect between the courts, as their sentences are often appealed and reduced in the High Court. So one magistrate from South Africa gave an example where his sentence that he gave was appealed, and the High Court ended up reducing the sentence because, in his words, the animal did not die and the actions weren't premeditated, even though this magistrate felt that the actions were premeditated because this crime was carried out by 4 people. And it left him feeling quite demotivated and disempowered. And in his words, the work is done in the lower courts and it's just set aside in the higher courts. The participants also feel that there is a lack of consistency in the sentencing of wildlife-related crimes in countries, so between the provinces or districts, and also across borders in South Africa and Mozambique. And this could be due to the prescribed sentence as per the legislation for that province, which is the case in South Africa, or because of the presiding officer's perception of the seriousness of the crime. And then courts, particularly in Mozambique, lack resources to function effectively. For example, in Mozambique, there is often no vehicle or fuel to visit crime scenes as part of the proceedings, of the crime proceedings. Then there are several issues that the magistrates raised that affect the outcomes of bails and applications and judgments and sentencing. And the first thing is the information and the evidence that's brought before court. Many magistrates spoke about the evidence that's brought before them that is poorly collected, poorly managed, and then often exempted from being entered into evidence. They also spoke about affidavits that are often incomplete, and then relevant law enforcement officials that do not come to court to testify during the bail hearing, which then leads them to bail being granted. And of course, in bail hearings, they also have to consider the safety of the bail applicant. One magistrate told the story of how a person who was on trial but out on bail was killed, and it later came to light that he was a person in a lower criminal syndicate, and his death was ordered by the syndicate to silence him. The magistrates also stressed that when it comes to the decisions that they make in court, they can only consider what is brought before them. So despite their own understanding of wildlife crime, the prosecutor needs to bring the impacts of the environmental crime before the court. We cannot consider it, especially during sentencing. And then some South African magistrates especially felt that some of the legislation is outdated. So, for example, certain South African provincial ordinances or decrees date back as far as 1969. So the prescribed penalties are inappropriate, and also the legislation and the penalties across the provinces are inconsistent. So the courts in both countries also require foreign support, including local languages such as Portuguese and Tsonga, Siswati and Venda, as well as Mandarin and Vietnamese. Often there are only a few interpreters that service a very large area or a large number of courts, and it's often the case that an interpreter is not available if he or she is sick or if they're required in another court, and then a case is postponed and delayed. And in some cases, the magistrates have received complaints that the rights of the accused is infringed upon as law enforcement officials were not able to communicate with that person in the language, in their language. And then one other thing that's also quite concerning is that the magistrates also told us from Mozambique that in Mozambique, few environmental crimes actually make it to court, and for a variety of reasons. In some cases, the wildlife crime takes place in very remote areas, and the law enforcement response therefore can be quite slow, and the criminal avoid apprehension. But where there was an apprehension, the courts are also very far away and from where the accused is being kept, and often there's no transport to bring the accused or the witnesses to court. And then also, again, evidence collection that's been done poorly, and ultimately the case just doesn't make it to court. Then there are some other observations that the magistrates also noted and that concerns them. It's not necessarily something that they have power over, but it's issues that they brought up. They're very concerned about the untouchables that never make it to court, and also this recycling of poachers that they see. Numerous magistrates noted that those brought before court are mainly the poachers or those lower in the criminal syndicate chain. And it seems in their words, the untouchables who lead the poor and rural people into the lives of crime are never before court, and that they urge that investigations take place at a higher level of the criminal network, not just focusing on the foot soldiers. They're also quite concerned about the deportation of foreign nationals once they've been successfully convicted. So often they see foreign nationals accused of wildlife crime, and there was a particular reference to Eastern countries such as China and Vietnam, or then accused with dual South African Mozambican citizenship that are often deported after trial following an early release. And they feel that their sentences are then undermined when these convicted criminals do not serve their sentence, and then they get to potentially continue to operate abroad while their families remain in South Africa and in Mozambique. They're also quite concerned about the media reports of corrupt judicial officers and the talks of court syndicates that help those accused of rhino poaching or trafficking, especially the higher level syndicate, higher up in the syndicate chain, to help them to avoid court. And some of them even suspect foul play in their own court proceedings, where they suspect certain delays are done on purpose. So, for example, the police who is responsible for the transport of the accused or witnesses to the courtroom is often delayed, and the transport couldn't have been secured for the day, and then the case again is postponed as part of a delay tactic. They also noted that the importance of transboundary cooperation. They noted that it does, however, take time for countries to form relationships and build trust and design and co-implement strategies to develop wildlife trafficking, while international criminal syndicates are very dynamic and they operate and they adapt and they build connections very quickly. They are quite concerned about the level of inexperienced prosecutors. So in South Africa, some provinces where wildlife crimes are more common, there are a handful of state prosecutors who are quite experienced in handling wildlife crime cases, but in the areas, especially where it's less common, prosecutors have much less experience. And often the accused make use of legal aid defense attorneys who are often also very inexperienced, and then they must be allowed time to undergo training on environmental crimes, which further delays the cases. And then they also often see prosecutors who are unaware of legislation that they could use that is not necessarily about rhino poaching, wildlife trafficking, but focuses on links to other crimes that they could use to bring an accused before court, which they often do not make use of. So some of the recommendations that came from this group is really to sensitize all levels of the judiciary, including the law enforcement and prosecutors, of the seriousness and the impact of wildlife crime, so that they can bring that to court. As mentioned, so that the prosecution should present the context and the impact of the crime, including the far-reaching impact that wildlife poaching and trafficking has on the large environment, people, safety and security, and the rule of law. We should also provide training to prosecutors and support them in building their experience in these kind of cases. And then if the judicial system is ever going to serve as an actual deterrence to wildlife crime, there needs to be uniformity in the sentencing across the borders and across provinces. And then they also are calling for an update of legislation or the harmonization of legislation. Some of them even suggested one piece of legislation that can serve all provinces, or even transnational legislation where countries have the same objectives. Then, of course, they're asking for better training of law enforcement to improve the evidence collection and management in preparation for courts. They're asking for more resources for the courts to better operate and function. They're also asking of, they also recommended that rangers and law enforcement attend court, not just to give evidence, but also to see and to learn how the evidence was received, so that they can improve on how they present their evidence in cases in the future. And in South Africa, with regards to the resources, making resources available to courts, there's actually one South African magistrate that indicated her interest to explore how we can possibly use sentencing to produce resources that can be put back into funding law enforcement efforts. Then, of course, they need language support inside and outside of court, pre and during trial, by securing more translators. And then, of course, an example of this colloquium, they're asking for more opportunities where judicial transboundary collaboration and learning can be strengthened. So those are some of the recommendations that and learnings that came out of this event, which I hope you agree is quite rich. And I'd love to hear more from others in this in the Southern Africa landscape. What have your experiences been with regards to the judiciary in that country? Thank you.
Thank you, Lara, for your presentation. And it's good also to have from our participant if they can share some experience. Looking at the two presentations that were given, we have the LEAP implementation strategy in the SADC. Maybe we have other participants from other regions that are following this webinar. If they can share with us their experience on how the law enforcement is done in other areas, so that we can reach our knowledge and we can also perform better in our region. So, Lisa, do you have any question from the screen on your mind that can also be shared with our participants?
Yeah, let me just look 1 second. There was one comment just from Anthony Kamau, who asked if the presentation, he was especially interested in the presentation of CHISA. I'm not sure if you have any question, Anthony, also on that. Anthony, you're unmuted. Not working. Wait 1 second. CHISA, is there maybe something you can also say with looking at Lara's presentation and your experience in Malawi and also Malawi-Zambia TFCA? This is coming more from the judiciary side, but from a wildlife or protected area officer, what were some of your frustrations working on law enforcement and anti-poaching? What were some of your experiences?
Well, the experiences are quite similar. One, you initially, I think from 2018 going forward, or a little area, things changed drastically because of sensitization. But before that, the justice system was not really responding to the problem that was on the ground. So even with that great effort that was put into to apprehend the poachers or the traffickers, then you found most people were just getting a fine, and the following day they would be out on the streets. So really it had to take a lot of sensitization to impress on the judicially, even the police. The wildlife crime was not really that the crimes are taken seriously, and the
I lost sound. Did anybody else lose sound? But CHISA, yeah. So basically, what you say is that the same problems existed on the protected area level that on the sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, I just do an example when the judiciary came up with sentencing guidelines on wildlife crime. So they were like, for this case, this is the starting point, that's the end point. So if it is the elephant specimen, this is the lowest you can impose in terms of years. So if looking at different magistrates in different areas, the way they were applying them was quite different. So yeah, I find one magistrate still wants to move out of the sentencing guidelines, which were endorsed by the judicial system itself. So yeah, so it's in a similar experience. Things have changed, have improved, I think. But yeah, we're coming from the almost same background. In terms of Malawi, I'm sure on the Zambian side, there are also experiences, maybe colleagues from Zambia.
Thank you very much, Chiza. Cornelia, we have one question from Colm Zuwao. I'm sorry if I did not pronounce your name correct, but Colm, would you have a question? If yes, you can unmute your mic.
Yes, I have a question. The question is directed to Chiza there. I just wanted to check at SADC level whether they have made any efforts to develop a wildlife crime database, considering that this is an important sort of the guideline for us to show the general trends across the region. So I just wanted to check whether they have got that database or they are having any efforts to develop such a database. And if they have it, it's now the post having it. If they have the database, I would also want to know how they've managed to standardize the database, given the differences in sensitivity of wildlife crime issues, especially wildlife crime security issues. So I just wanted to check around those issues to Mr. Chiza. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Colm. There was, I'll start by saying there was a provision in the strategy that there will be created a wildlife crime and prevention coordination unit within the SADC Secretariat. So my expectation was that if that unit was created, then they would be handling this, because it's explicitly mentioned in the strategy, particularly for member states. But I think I'm privileged to have Tawanda around. So Tawanda, can you help the wildlife crime database? Is it still on the card? So Tawanda, over to you.
Thank you. Afternoon, everyone, and thank you. The two presentations were quite informative. I also wanted, I think my hand was up for quite some time. I wanted to share some of the experience and observations. With regards to the database, I think there are a number of other platforms that are already there, like through Interpol, the Twix that you mentioned, the SADC Twix, the information exchange platform that was set up recently. But it's something that we are trying to test. But I think, as you might be aware, there's a lot of sensitivity with regards to some of these data regarding security and sensitivities of different countries. So in terms of handling of the data, it's one area that I think the member states will have to really find a way forward, so that whatever data they are bringing together is going to contribute towards improved management and protection of the species. So as such, there is quite a number of platforms. But within the LIB strategy itself, there is a facility for the information sharing platform. And already, like I said, there's this SADC Twix that is already there, where traffic is actually coordinating the collection of the data and so forth. But within SADC, some of the structures that are mentioned within the LIB strategy itself are at the moment being shared between the two directorates of the organ and that of the food, agriculture, and natural resources. So as such, there's quite a lot of things that we are yet to do. Maybe it's part of the learning process in terms of how we should implement them. But I also wanted to indicate that I think from observations, it's quite clear that the member states of SADC are at different levels in terms of legislation and also in terms of implementing SADC LIB. And as such, this element of awareness becomes very key, so that all the member states are come to some kind of equal footing in terms of information sharing and also this mutual legal assistance. That is very critical in terms of successful prosecution and convictions. But it is also important that we look at the entire crime value chain so that when we come with interventions, we look at some of the most critical challenged areas, so that we are able to intervene and support that. But it's also so critical that at this stage, I think the whole crime industry related to wildlife is assumed a very complex level, such that it's very clear that we need to bring in a number of other stakeholders besides just law enforcement. We think of, you know, this movement, which means customs, immigration. There is quite a lot of other key stakeholders that we are not seeing very active at the moment. So it's one area that I think we really need to think about to make sure that we are more effective in terms of protection of the resource. But I think lastly, I think another key element is to look at the market, what we call demand reduction strategies, but also looking at the transit areas where these products actually pass through are very key in terms of cooperation, in terms of actual exchange of information and tracking the criminal syndicates. Thank you for the opportunity.
Maybe to board presenters. Hi, to board presenters, maybe it's good to share your experience on how the task force and the working with the judiciaries and the collaboration that have been developed a long time has influenced corruption. Maybe what I want to understand is, as the corruption increase, so how does it behave in terms of collaboration within all these clusters?
Laura, would you like to respond to that?
Thanks, Lisa. I don't think I can actually answer that question from Cornelio, but what I can say is that I think when it comes to corruption in the judicial systems in South Africa, I mean, I don't think that there has been an, you know, evidence that's been published on that. I think it's still very much just something that's discussed in the media. We are yet to see judicial officers being taken to court for alleged corruption. So I think it's something that we're seeing in the media at this stage. And I think a lot of people suspect that it's happening. But I think we still have to see, at least in South Africa that I know of, I'm not too sure in Mozambique, that people are brought to book when it comes to these allegations of corruptions. But at this stage, that's only as far as I can go in terms of answering that question.
Thank you, Laura. I maybe also have one final question for Laura, and I think we can also then move on to the other two presentations. Your work has mainly focused on Mozambique and South Africa. To what extent do you think the collaboration under the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Area contributed to this exchange between the two countries? Like, what is the positive effect of the TFCA actually on this collaboration? Are you still muted? I've unmuted you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think I would say we work quite closely with the TFCA network. I see Pete is on this call. And because this is the landscape that we work in, we try and always make sure that our stakeholder engagement also considers the TFCA landscape. And call in, you know, as we need experts that understand transboundary issues. We call in the expert that can help with that. So, for example, when we had the colloquium, and also when we had other workshops with the judiciary in South Africa to update that handbook, you know, we bring in people that have, you know, that kind of transboundary knowledge and expertise of this issue, because as we know, wildlife trafficking is a transboundary issue that cannot be solved and only in one country or by one actor, but it needs that kind of collaboration across borders. And we see that kind of, even with the colloquium, that the judiciary also appreciated that trans-boundary cooperation. Unfortunately, we couldn't bring in the Zimbabwean judiciary, to represent that part of the TFCA, because the program that I'm working on only looks at the South African and Mozambican landscape. But through our other activities, we try and take a TFCA approach as well and bring in the right people. But yeah, I can see that there's the engagement that we were having. People appreciate that kind of transboundary engagement and lessons learning. So we hope to continue to do more of that.
Cornelia, there's one final question of Emil Smit. Emil, would you like to pose your question, please, and put your video on?
Thanks, Cornelia. Yeah, I just tried to articulate some of these kind of critiques of policing, and Lara was outlining the challenges faced by the judiciary both in Mozambique and in South Africa. And often now these techno-managerial approaches have very serious limitations. And in my research in the Kruger Park, I mean, often there's a huge amount of scholarship also on the limitations of police, and in the light of those limitations, there are many examples of police using excessive force or extrajudicial use of force, abusing their powers. And, in fighting wildlife crime, where police and the notion of maintaining order holds such a powerful political lure, how do you deal with these disturbing developments in policing and conservation law enforcement?
Laura, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you, Lisa. Kind of feel like I'm not able to answer these questions because I'm definitely not someone who is an expert on rules of engagement when it comes to law enforcement. But I must say, one of the things that we are doing also as the KETA program is providing support to the rangers in the Kruger National Park. We're working with a legal consultant to provide training to rangers in rules of engagement, especially when they come in contact with poachers or trespassers in the field. So to better prepare them what they can and what they cannot do, and what is legally required of them. So we hope that we can start to address some of those challenges when it comes to the force that the police uses and how they act, by providing consistent training to the rangers. I think we've done our second roadshow where we train and retrain rangers in terms of rules of engagement and conflict situations. So I'm hoping that the more we do that, the better we can address some of those problems.
Thank you, Lara. Maybe we'll take our last question from Mike Murphy. Mike, please pose your question.
Sorry, Cornelia, was less of a question than to follow up on the commentary of Lara, which is an excellent response to Emil's question. I think, Emil, you've raised a critical point. But this issue of policing and the extent to which policing within environmental situations, within wildlife protection exceeds the bounds of accepted or legal protocols is an important one. It's an important one because it's a wider societal issue. We've seen here in South Africa, reported extensively on the news, the use of extra police or military force in controlling the situations around coronavirus and the lockdowns. It's clear that a lot of the officers that go out there that are in the field do not have or are not equipped with the necessary legal understanding of their role and functions. And so this is why we believe that one of the ways to address this is to actually engage with officers and provide them with that knowledge and with that tool, pretty much in the way that Lara outlined our program has done in Kruger thus far. So I think it is a critical point. We obviously, across the board, do not want to see a situation where law enforcement officers are exceeding their mandate. And it is something that needs to be worked upon, particularly as so much of the focus is on protecting the natural resources, but we need to make sure that's done in the correct manner. Thanks, Cornelia.
Okay, thank you, Mike, and thank to everyone who has been actively participating in this first part of our session. So let us move to the next part of it, which is the third presentation by General Jan. So the presentation will be on the principle and practice for successful conservation. General Johan just is retired from South African Army. So he retired in 2006, and after 5 years of his service. So in 2013, he was appointed as a commanding officer, special project at SANParks, responsible for all matters related to the anti-poaching strategy, planning, and execution. He subsequently established Wildlife Crime and Corruption Combating Coordination Center at SANParks Head Office. So he's currently employed by PPF and seconded to the Department of Environmental Affairs, where he manages a program to establish wildlife zone in all the province. General Johan, please, the floor is yours, and share your experience and the success of the work that you're doing with our participant. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Lisa, for the run-up to this event. We all do many of these. I think it was very professionally done. And good afternoon, fellow Africans and supporters. I will share my screen. And Lisa has made sure that we stick to our time limit. So here we go. It's always good to have an opportunity like this. Knowledge that is not shared is not really knowledge. And look what we shared this afternoon. Probably not something totally new, but you know that context is important. The wildlife crime and the wildlife issue is so real, but it's also so emotive. And it's up to us as leaders on this beloved continent of us to make sure that sanity prevails, although one will never be able to take the emotion out of it. Friends, just Africa. Africa has a surface that equal to that what houses a half of the Earth's population. I just want to show this because everybody tells you by 2030 there will be 2 billion people and that coexistence will not be possible. It will be possible despite urbanization and other challenges. It will be possible if we make it possible. We see it coming. Another look at Africa. The many conflicts. This is not an up-to-date map. It is just to show all the conflicts. But friends, in those conflict areas that are not only renegades and rebels, with or without a cause, there are responsible defense forces, armies, forces from the United Nations peacekeeping. There are always opportunity for collaboration. And I think it's another reality we must live with. This is not going to go away in a decade or so. This is the place where we do our conservation, not in a laboratory or anywhere in an office. Africa, the last home of megafauna, this is heritage. But if that is too fuzzy for you, this is the economic engine of Africa. Long after gold and platinum tourism and experience tourism will remain and prevail and be so badly needed. This is happening on our beat. We've got to do something about the plundering of these resources. Yet another look at Africa. And we see a sequence there, we see numbers there that we know, but we've got to be aware of what will happen to our resources. if in a decade's time we don't get to grips with many of these. I'm more familiar with the rhino scene, and the rhino will not go extinct, but to have free roaming rhino growing populations will take an effort. We also know this picture, and it always amazes me how from half a dozen ports of entry to another half a dozen ports of entry, give or take, this happens. And that the world and Interpol and us and LEAP and SADC and DLT FCA in South Africa and DEF cannot do something about this. It must be possible, and it begs the question about meaningful border control and ports. And we know that is not as easy as that, but many people mentioned interagency cooperation. These are the pictures we all know. This picture was showed a number of times this afternoon. I said to Werner when we rehearsed on Monday or yesterday, this is the central theme. This is our vision. This is a solution. This is a vehicle to utilize to get to viable, sustainable longevity in conservation and preserving the heritage and building that economic engine. We got common ground. It's not only the rhino. We talk species, we talk subspecies, and we're not going there. And that is why often we use the rhino skirts, the rhino crisis, if you want, as a vehicle, as a wake-up call to get to a point where we say, no more, let's stop it here in an intelligent way. And it started here, on that date. These foundations were laid by visionaries, by people preceding us. And we discovered in 2012 that this was already done and we only need to dust it off and implement. And that is where, to my mind, we sit today, implementing the intention of our leaders at the time and revive and relive and rejuvenate. Friends, without getting technical about it, we are doing what I indicate on the left slide. A lot of it happens. We heard it this afternoon. I just think it is good sometimes to stand back and to revisit. Where are we going? What are the scenarios and risks? Are we caught up in activity traps? Are we so overcome? Do we gloss over other things to allow us the security chain that we call it, the analysis, prevention, the response and evaluation? And then important, yet again, and I know many of these exercises have been done and are being done, what are the tasks? What are the capabilities? The capability consists of people and equipment and IT and organizational structures and technology. And then who must do it? And that who is not easy. Everybody wants to participate. There are so many participants. That glue to put that together, that is the DLT FCA in that areas where we active and rubbing it off in adjacent areas. I think some of the logic here and there, we are missing it without getting now too strategic or too philosophical about how we go about things. I just took this, the AU structure, the structures were put up by CHISA and also the GLTA structure. Let's be mindful of this because it's only as good as the people in there, and those people are only as good as us and everybody participating. Let's utilize, but let's not overestimate the formal structures. The structures will not do the work. The work will be done informally by a plethora of NGOs, those that does such important work. We cannot do this work without them. We've got to make sure that we side with, that we associate with and cooperate with those that share our vision, that can contribute towards the cause and bind them into the team. The private owners. In my own country, I so often find that we don't really involve them. We are conditional about it because the poaching issue is a matter of national security or of crime intelligence. In South Africa, more than half the rhino are owned by private owners, are protected by private industry. One cannot, whoever you are, whichever agency you are, not involve them. The industry, there will be a technology wow some other time. But with the industry, one must be careful. We are caught up roughly between industry push and donor pull. The industry paint this lovely PowerPoint pictures to donors, and in between is us lot who badly wants resources, and very often it doesn't work out. because we're not knowledgeable buyers. And then, of course, the communities in which we function, with whom we function, with whom we share the territory. This is a contrast. You can run this like on the left hand, and many people do it. When you have a pre-owned bakkie or Jeep and a smartphone, you have a joint operation center in the making. But and not all can look like the picture that is taken in Skakuza. That is also not necessary, but we'll have to formalize a little bit on how we manage these nerve centers, fusion centers. They are sprung up everywhere. I'm just delighted that everywhere, I think we realized you've got to have some fusion. You've got to. And then this project that Petron is also working on now with other people, revisit strategy, but immediately bring it down to concept of operations, terms of reference and SOPs. Every so often we jump from strategy to SOP. The concept of operations we must agree upon, because that will ensure that between the various countries, there's enough interoperability and cooperation and coordination to make sure that we have impact. We dare not waste. Without getting technical, we don't need a 3-story building somewhere in Gaborone or Nairobi or Windhoek or Pretoria. We need a core group of people, and we have that core group of people to take all the information listed there, because we're drowning in it. There's enough information. We use a common platform. Seymour is one, Smart is one, Cyber is one, Ranger is one. There will be more. Use them so that we have a joint planning platform that standardized data flows, and we can execute enforcement, conservation, security, and manage our resources well. All of this is within our reach, and some of the framework exists, and yet every day almost one realizes that we lose impact because we're not coordinated enough on a sustainable level with skeleton staff, because we don't have a lot of people. The software can help us a lot. Just something on this, I mentioned that earlier, they look a lot different. Once the merchandise, once the horn or the claws or the skins are in the container or at these ports of entry, it's almost too late. You can have a seizure there, and we must continue doing it. It goes way lower. It goes to close cooperation, where you don't have necessarily have all the scanners and all the resources, but we must not forget technology at a border post on our or in our country. Just a reminder, map date to 2013 in the dark days in Kruger. Not that Kruger's problem is solved, not solved, but in the dark days, then when it was terrible, then we built this picture, not because we were so intelligent, we learned from other people. And notice that the boundaries then was not the park boundary or the park border. We then said, let's talk about a zone. A protected area exists in a zone. And we had the intensive protection zone. The most successful zone in Kruger today is the joint protection zone. It's a flagship of cooperation between blue private parks, no fence between us, and the concessions on the Mozambique side. The figures of this year and last year prove that is the concept, that is the way to go. Yes, you add a little bit of technology, you still have your communities. You talk roughly in layman's terms from R40 highway in South Africa through the other side of the Limpopo Mountains. And then the success story of the concept protection, and I think Werner will refer to that shortly. Just a little photo, that is alliances. That is how you meet. You jump across the wire, save you 10 hours of drive and 10 back. That is how you meet with those colleagues. The map courtesy Petron. I just want to share this, and I did this presentation at CITES last minute with Johannesburg. In 2012, 13, 14 was the cry of South African public. Shoot, phase them out. Hot pursuit, and they wanted the general to do the hot pursuit. Was terribly disappointed when it didn't happen. We moved that within 2-3 years, working with 7 different parties in Mozambique, from the Gara frontier, the Fona Bravia, the various branches of the police, private scouts, provincial scouts, national scouts, to where we are here now. A strict rules of engagement, a move to move that fence, to move it to the eastern side of the concessions, do joint border operations. You don't have to cross the border to catch the perpetrator. I believe we should share ranger wellness, ranger empowerment. I'm teaching you a ranger as a separate occupational group, and we're doing work in South Africa, and I know all over Africa. It's the asset. Technology makes things possible, only people make it. To interoperability and share lessons frequently, online or then in more secure environments. Let's again share canines, what canines can mean, enforcement, prevention. We need to be knowledgeable buyers. We have got to share on industry technology and make the pull and the pull. We can help each other be knowledgeable. Solutions will differ, but the layered approach and the various and the platforms that we've sorted out, and we can make sure that you don't have to learn the expensive lessons that we've learned. We failed with 1/3 of our programs in Kruger, but the lessons learned. Almost done, and I normally use this slide these days. We know the reality from end user to the slaughter to of people recruited as poachers. We also know the reality of the communities. Nobody is denying it. It has never been like that. I'm personally on it since February 23rd. Despite the fact that we say you must do firm law enforcement, let's not make the thin green line a firewall or something hostile. It's not necessary. It need not be either or. The thin green line need not be unfriendly towards the community. And often you find that the thin green line is wanted by the community. Those very communities also want stability, want security. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Major General John, for the experience and the knowledge that you have shared with us. So we'll proceed with our last presentation, which will be on rewilding and law enforcement in Mozambique component of the Greater Limpopo and Lubombo Transfrontier Conservation Areas, which will be done by Vernon. Vernon has a background in ecology and served in various capacities at PPF before being appointed as a CEO in 2008. He has been involved in execution of more than 500 different development projects within transfrontier conservation areas throughout Southern Africa, and is part of team responsible for facilitating the establishment of Kalagari, Greater Limpopo, AILs, Lichterfeld, Gaza, and Malawi. He also serves at various board and steering committees. Notably for his presentation, is a member of steering committee of Limpopo National Park, Maputo Special Reserve, and Zinaf National Parks in Mozambique. Vernon, you are welcome and to share your experience and your presentation with our participants. Thank you.
Thanks, Cornelio. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, Cornelio, and thank you, everybody. Lisa, Clara, and the team there for, again, organizing this seminar, webinar. And it's my pleasure to present to you a little bit more of an expansion of, I think, my colleagues that went before me. And today I would like to just drill a little bit more into some of the facts or the details of the Mozambican success story, as I'd like to call it, as a result of transfrontier conservation areas. So this is where Peace Parks has been active over the past 20 years. And I've had the privilege to be on this journey almost since the beginning. Currently Peace Parks works in 10 countries in Southern Africa, but there's a focus on Great Limpopo, Lebombo, Xhosa, Malawi, Zambia, and some other TFCAs. And of course, and we've mentioned it before, the General just mentioned it just now, what we are about in TFC development is a holistic approach to conservation and development. It's not looking at one aspect only. TFCAs is about the political will and commitment, it's about conservation at scale, it's about community development, but it's also about the business case for making these initiatives viable and sustainable. And for today's presentation, I'll just focus on the second pillar of our work as Peace Parks Foundation in Mozambique, and that is our work at conservation. And that again is broken into 4 components: restoration, or rewilding as it's often called these days, your normal protection, law enforcement work, governance, and of course, financing or financing mechanisms. And on a map, what does that mean? It means, if we talk of Great Limpopo, on the left-hand side map, I'm going to give you some information on Limpopo National Park in terms of rewilding and law enforcement, Bani National Park and Zenaf, all forming part of the larger Great Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Area. And in the Lebombo Transfrontier Conservation Area, we'll focus a little bit on Maputo Special Reserve and the marine component. So, of course, one of the critical aspects, and it's so understated sometimes, but you have to have money to turn a nice conversation into conservation. And if you look at, this is the input from Peace Parks Foundation into the Mozambican component of TFCA. So this is the funding that we raise from our private donors, trusts, foundations, etc., etc. And over the period of 2016 to 2019, we've mobilized just under $28 million. And you'll see that investments have gone into Bani National Park, Limpopo, Maputo Special Reserve, and Zenaf. And if we then add the large development partners that were also financing these particular areas, like KfW, the World Bank, MOSBU program, GIZ, AFD, Biofund, etc. If you add all of that together, that's a further $33 million that have been injected over this 4 years into the Mozambican component of those 2 TFCAs. So we're looking at about $60.7 million only in the last 4 years, which I think is a phenomenal indication that whatever is happening on the ground, something is going right. And if we add the budgets for 2020, and I'm not sure whether one will spend all of that because of COVID, one can add at least another $40 million to the development budget. So if you add 2020, we're looking at close to $104 million of investment into these 4 TFCAs. These 5 particular areas in those 2 TFCAs. So what does that do? What did that result in terms of rewilding and restoration of these landscapes? Of course, one of the highlights for me, of course, is always to bring animals back that became locally extinct in these particular areas. And over 12,000 animals have been translocated to these areas indicated on this map. In Maputo Special Reserve, just short of 5,000 animals. In Limpopo Park, also just short of 5,000 animals. And then a newly created park now established, park being rehabilitated in Zenaf, where we've been involved for the past 4 years, moving over 2,000 animals, including about 165 elephant to the Zenaf National Park. Not shown on this map is Gonorrhea, where we've also, with support from GIZ, helped also restock some species of animals into the Gonorrhea National Park in 2013. It's exciting to see some of the species like, these tiny little antelopes, oribi, and sable antelope, and animals that became extinct being relocated into these areas. And it doesn't take a long time. This is images of the North National Park from a camera trap. We suddenly see thriving ecosystems. And this is just at one watering hole in the North National Parks, the North National Park. Once you get to a point where you've established a suitable number of prey base, if you like, it's also time to reintroduce predators. And last week was also particularly exciting for us when we reintroduced the first 4 hyena into the North National Park. On the cards for the North and for Maputo Special Reserve for next year is also lion, leopard, cheetah, and some other species. So it's a really, really exciting time for Mozambique in general and the rehabilitation of these areas. Now, a lot of people often ask me, isn't it dangerous? Aren't you bring these animals into a country where the law enforcement isn't good and well established, and where the wildlife crime is not supported through the judiciary to the extent that it should, etc., etc. And yes, it's true. There is a threat to wildlife. There's a threat to wildlife everywhere. Even one of the best managed parks like Kruger National Park, there is a threat. That's always the case. And sometimes it's exacerbated by external factors. For example, we've seen a huge increase the last month or so in snaring incidents in many of the parks, which is related to COVID and the economic situation. And so it is a reality. But with those investments that I referred to earlier, we also see a phenomenal response on the ground by our partners and in terms of capacity to look after these areas properly. There's incredibly good, this is the top left photo is a photo of the quick reaction unit in Limpopo National Park operating from the forward operating base there. And this unit is just specifically there to react to emergency incidents. And there's a full-time helicopter there. It's using a Seymour system, looking at movement of all ranges throughout the park. And there's instantaneous reaction based on detection of movement. So it's really come a long way in the last 3 to 5 years in all of the parks that I mentioned. So if you want to look at the statistics, what does that mean? So you can see the ranges deployed in 2015 was 88, and today it's 237 in those protected areas. The patrols, that's all types per annum, was as low as 1,700 in 2015, and today we're looking at 9,000 plus. And the protected area state that has been effectively protected, again, almost doubled from 1.2 million to 2.4 million hectares. So those were the inputs. And what's the output? What was the result? And if you look at firearms removed from the system, if you add those the past 4 years up until the end of 2019, if you add them up, we're looking at over 360 firearms, over 551 arrests, and then also the collection of over 25,000 snares from the system. And that's in the past 4 years alone. So this is the type of trend that you'd like to see. And this is just a snapshot of the impacts of wildlife crime in 2019, preventing wildlife crime. As the journal also referred to, cross-border cooperation is incredibly important and as part of the success story. Behind this map, that's a slide of a typical meeting between Kruger Park and Limpopo National Park officials. And this is just, again, a little bit of a deep dive into the statistics, comparing deployment of rangers with patrol hours, aerial patrol hours with a helicopter and the fixed wing, and then your arrests that have gradually gone down over the time. Another way to illustrate the impact, this is a heat map of what's the impact cross-border between Limpopo National Park on the right. So that line, white line, is the international boundary between South Africa and Kruger Park on the left and the Limpopo Park on the right. There's the Massanger Dam. And this is a picture, a snapshot picture of the incursions and the movement of poachers between Kruger and Mozambique, Limpopo Park. And that's for the full year of 2018. And if you look at 2019, we saw about a 70% reduction in that cross-border movement across the international boundary. And this was just, okay, increased capacity on the Mozambican side, but incredibly good and strong cooperation, sharing of intelligence, a daily WhatsApp group, one radio system between the rangers, monthly meetings, and that coordination, you know, to deal with this wildlife crime element has really advanced the concept and the practical requirement of transfrontier conservation areas quite significantly. Statistically, if you look at the impacts in Kruger National Park, this is where we were, the dark days in Kruger National Park and rhino poaching. And this was the result at the end of 2019. I think Lara also showed these statistics. And there's a definite trend in terms of the impact of all of these efforts have made. And at the same time, we saw, wow, okay, so you see the reduction in elephant and rhino poaching, but we saw a significant increase in elephant poaching. And it quickly increased from 2015 to 2018 while this was decreasing. And the two countries sat together and really, you know, developed a strategy to address that. And this is the result. And I believe informally, our statistics for 2020 is only a loss of 3 elephants thus far for the entire year up until today. So again, this is as a result of significant cross-border collaboration and improved capacity. This is my last slide. This is one of the elephant that was collared. I think this is Tiaria, I can't remember. And this was done by elephants alive. And it just shows the movement of these fantastic creatures, you know, across international boundaries, irrespective of the boundaries, moving from Limpopo to Bani National Park, to the North National Park. And this is the future. And if you look and you analyze the results and the impact of financing and capacity and all of these things combined, this is no longer a pie in the sky situation. This is the first movement that we see from these elephants spontaneously. They're starting to sense that the landscapes are safer to move, and they're starting to force their way between these particular areas on the Mozambican side. So I won't be surprised if in 5 years one sees this become a trickle, this trickle of movement of elephant and other species become a stream. And it's just really a matter of time for that to take place if one considers and look at the incredible progress that Mozambique has made over the past 5 years or so. Thank you very much. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Vernam, for your good presentation, sharing a lot of success stories in rewilding our national parks, particularly in the greater Limpopo National Transfrontier Conservation Area and Libombo as well. So Lisa, do we have any questions from the chat for our presenters?
Yes, we do have. Rebecca Witter has a question, but maybe she wants to just put on her camera and microphone so to ask. She can ask it herself.
Okay, Rebecca, please.
Sure, thank you, Obrigada. I'm sorry, I can't turn on my camera. I'm having a problem with it recently. I really appreciate all these fantastic presentations. They're so insightful and thoughtful and showing such a dynamic landscape that all of you are working on. I really appreciate this chance to engage with you. I'm calling in from the United States. I'm a social researcher who's been conducting work in Limpopo National Park and in some of those villages where those elephants, where the elephants mapping we're just showing. So I know that route pretty well. I've been impressed today and in recent presentations of a lot of presenters underscoring the need for community engagement and community development and CB and community-based natural resource management and the TFCA approach and the LEAP approach, et cetera. And then when General Joust, ended his presentation with this, really thoughtful and provocative comment about where to draw the thin green line and the reality of the communities. The community landscape is dynamic and diverse and not homogeneous at all. So people have a lot of different experiences. And yet in Limpopo National Park, especially for villages living within the park, and targeted for resettlement, although many have not been resettled yet. Some have, some have not. The experience has been a negative one. And the approach has been one of further marginalization and dispossession, and sometimes making enemies of those people. And it's not simple, it's very complicated, but where I would love to hear people's responses or thoughts about how to more meaningfully do community engagement in this landscape of anti-poaching and in this landscape of dispossession. And I welcome feedback from any of you, and including you, Senor Miguel.
Thank you. Some more questions, Lisa?
No, I'm not sure if anybody would like to respond to this question.
Yeah, I can respond if I may. And Miguel, Cornelio, please add, because he's been the park warden there for a number of years, as you know, Rebecca, and nice to hear your voice. Sorry we can't see you. Of course, you know, we underscore that this conservation is not happening in isolation of the landscape and the people living in it. There's been quite a lot of impact on improving this situation. Like you said, there was this negative hostility, and I think there was a lot of mistakes. And of course, you know, if you hindsight is also always 20/20 if you look back at things. But one of the exciting projects that I've seen happening, and it's also been supported by Peace Parks, we've recently allocated $1 million to that, was a project called Herding for Health. And we're doing it in partnership with Conservation International. And the objective is to work with the communities inside Limpopo Park and outside Limpopo Park. And one of their most important livelihoods, as you know, is cattle. And the program is designed around helping them to mitigate wildlife-human conflict. So that has been almost brought to zero, where it was a huge issue and a huge concern for many people, and including the government. And the one evening, for example, just in Mavotsi community, a pride of 7 lion killed 42 cattle. So the impact was quite severe. Unfortunately, the Herding for Health program, which is about herding people being trained to professionally herd their cattle, this has now become a wonderful success story in Limpopo Park, because now the cattle are being raised in the park, but in a productive way, and they're actually helping the park with development. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think it broke for a second, but you can continue, Werner.
And so this Herding for Health now, the conflict has been reduced to zero between, you know, from predations and from predators, and the communities and the park officials are working together to make fire breaks with you know, concentrated grazing throughout the park. And there's 36 of these eco rangers that we call them, that have been employed from Mavotsi community as the first phase of this project. And the next part of the phase of the program is to then help them for the meat produced with these cattle to access the market. This program has been very successfully implemented in South Africa and in Botswana, and also in Lesotho. And we see there's great potential for these type of interventions to be successfully deployed. So definitely it's something that hasn't been done as extensively or financed as extensively, but fortunately there's a lot of new great emerging initiatives to support this type of developments, which I think is very positive.
I value that. Go.
Go ahead, General.
Thank you. There's no denying that all over the world, but specifically in Africa, borders and boundaries become fault lines. Borders and boundaries become fault lines. It's nowhere more evident than in our parks in Africa, when just outside almost every park there's squalor and poverty. There's no denying that. And like the other maps that I showed initially in my briefing, this is a map that should be imprinted in our minds. But I think, again, the glue is missing. If I look at all the projects that are conducted, I take the private parks west of Kruger, how many projects? I take even the concessions in the Lebombo concessions. But I think, like we have managed tediously and over a long time to bring together the agencies and departments of the security cluster, we need to bring the cluster of departments in countries that are responsible for rural development, job creation, and related welfare type projects. It's really scattered. There is no cohesion. A lot is done, but to have impact, we'll have to make sure that we get some glue and get that recipe right and make it work better than even the security cluster.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I think I also have, I would like to ask Major General Joanne, if you can share with us what were the challenges to bring together all these, to build the clusters and to come with the multi-sectorial approach of combating wildlife crimes and so forth. We understand that now we are on a good way, but what were the challenges to build up all these team?
Thank you, Chair. Let me try and be as concise as possible. It will always be a challenge when you try to put together parties in the security environment. Specifically in our country and most countries in Africa, where poaching has become an embarrassment. The world is saying to us, you own these assets, can you not sort it out? You say to us, African Solutions for Africa, why not? Now you get together the security cluster participants, different cultures, different approaches, and it's difficult to sort out the role and responsibilities. Chair, you need to start with a concept of operations, even if it's a one-page document, so that initially roles and responsibilities can be clarified. From there, the interoperability, from there, commonality, from there, sharing assets, but most of all, leadership. Not the type of leadership that means there will be a single leader and he or she will be the field marshal or the overall commander. The type of leadership that will make the coalition of the willing work. Too often, the conservationists, the rangers, inherit this task. Now they have it. And the police would stand back and the defense force would stand back and other agencies will stand back. And let me reiterate again, we're seeing the same now in the welfare of the communities. Now the parks are inheriting that. Now you tell the park, the protected area, you're responsible for that. We are. But it's a common responsibility. So I cannot overemphasize leadership. You know, and sometimes you lead from the front, sometimes you lead your peers, but often we must trust ourselves to lead from the back, to inform our leaders and to make decisions so that they can take decisions, to get to things that are so clear to us because they're also busy. There are other priorities and urgencies that often don't let them understand the context with due respect.
Thank Lisa, please.
If I may, there is one question that might be a good follow-up from, there are also more follow-up questions on the community aspect, but maybe it would be good to, one second, Michael Wright. He would like the General to expand a bit on further on the levels of cooperation and communication that there is with the tourism concessionaires and the value that they are playing. So maybe that was I think you were their second level of, well, you had those three areas. So if you could elaborate a bit more on that. And I think it's also one of the recent GLTFCA successes, isn't it?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question also. I have seen people talk to each other because of rhino that never would have spoken to each other. And two parties are conservationists and tourism operators. We both depend on a depletable asset. And if we don't defend that asset collectively, we will both lose it for conservation and for the economic engine part of it. As often, it's not going far enough, but the fact that in every strategy that we formulate now, you will find the law enforcement and the legal party, but you will find tourism in there and you will find community in there. It cannot be otherwise. And if we talk tourism, it must not be only the wildlife economy that feeds our communities, but all the other parts of the value chain. I cannot overemphasize enough, as a person primarily in law enforcement, how important it is that we cooperate with the private sector. And in this instance, the private sector are the concessions. They realize what is at stake. They realize the asset. They contribute significantly. There are good leaders there and resources that must be harnessed and utilized collectively. And it can be done.
Thank you. Maybe one question also to Vietnam. Why is translocation and rewilding of protected areas so important for the entire TFCA?
Thanks. I think obviously there's two very important elements to translocating animals from one area to the next, where they used to occur. The one is just ecosystem functioning. I had the sobering experience when arriving in Zanaf National Park in 2015, when we were doing our feasibility analysis, where the Peace Parks Foundation will sign a co-management agreement with the government of Mozambique to manage the park. And when we arrived there, the shocking thing that I saw was that there was not one single bird away from the river in the landscape, in the environment as you were driving around. And there was virtually no animals, virtually no birds, very few insects even. So you see a gradual slowing down of the whole ecosystem functioning, and incredible bush encroachment, and as a result, incredibly hot fires. So that a lot of the things start going backwards. When the elephants were reintroduced, and I visited the park a few years later, around about the same time of the year, which was April, and the park was alive with birds, with raptors, with vultures. You couldn't believe the change in such a short space of time. So from ecological functioning perspective, that's very important, that the system functions as it's supposed to be functioning. So that's the one aspect. The other aspect is obviously economic importance of rewilding. Visitors from all over the world come to Africa predominantly to see wildlife. That's our unique selling point in Africa, is our charismatic wildlife. These large mammals that the general referred to. Nowhere else in the world does this occur. So it's an important job creator. It's an important economic driver. And we've seen the impact with COVID now, where billions have been lost. Thousands of jobs have been lost from tourism. That's predominantly hooked. One of the predominant hooks for tourism to Africa is wildlife. Culture and all of other things as well, but there's culture and scenery in anywhere else in the world. So I think as an economic driver and also for ecological functioning, those are the two main reasons why this is so important, that these rewilding of these parks take place.
Thank you. There is also a question from Patience. It's how can we make the communities living inside the protected areas in Mozambique the first line of defense against wildlife crime? And I would also like to invite all others speakers that have been with us this afternoon, if they have some experience to give or to answer, they are welcome to do so. Thank you.
Otherwise, there's also something on the chat from Timothy, who also shared some of his experience working on a project with guardian dogs. Timothy, I'm not sure if you would like to elaborate a bit more on it. So we just exchange experience across the board.
Should we answer Patience's question first?
You can answer, yeah, you can answer first, Werner, if you would like to.
Yeah, I mean, that I've got all the answers or any answers, but the one thing that I've learned with communities becoming the first line of defense to look after their natural assets is ownership. As simple as that. And if people feel that they have ownership, they'll look after those resources. We work in many programs in many countries, and that's always the bottom line. If there's ownership and if there's benefits, that's people say that's my impala. We worked in Zambia. I can give you a quick story, and there was a community conservancy created called Simala. And we were driving around, and there was a lot of animals that were relocated to Simala. And there were two young boys, and they were standing next to the road, and we saw the impala on the other side of the fence. And Professor Nambota, Andrew, he was in the car, and he said to those young boys, he said, "Whoa, look at those impala, that's nice relish. We're gonna eat them." And the young boys, they're probably 9 or 10, he said, "If you touch our impala, we're gonna hit you." So they were very boisterous to protect their impala. So they had ownership, you know, at a very young age. These are their impala, and they were looking after them. And I think that was just a very good, very illustrative for me of how important ownership is in community development initiatives. And yeah, that's the only comment that I can have. Thank you.
Thank you, Vernon. So do we have any other speaker who would like to give a bit of experience on the same topics?
Timothy, if you like the floor, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Clara. Yes, several years ago, I managed a project distributing livestock guardian dogs predominantly to small stock farmers. And why I raise this issue is my small NGO is Wildlife Poisoning Prevention and Conflict Resolution. And we find ourselves concentrating on anti-poisoning because so much poison is used by communities and by farmers as their last resort to manage wildlife depredations, killing of livestock and so on. But there are many other methods that can be applied, such as the livestock guardian dogs, and which can be done. It can be done with cattle, it can be done with donkeys, and all, not all animals, but many animals will act as guardians to other animals, such as donkeys, for example, with sheep, where the donkey is bonded from a young age with a flock of sheep. They act as a guardian. You know, we find in Africa that cows are sent out with a pastoralist, with the livestock owner. They go out into the bush to graze. They have cow bells on their necks so they can be located by the herder. But in the evening, they're brought back and they're put into a kraal or a boma, and the bells are left on. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that is the dinner bell for the lions. It indicates the lions where the cattle are. So it's a simple management intervention that means when the cattle come in the evening, the bells should be taken off. And there should be a dog in the enclosure that can wake up the herders or the owners, say there's trouble here. There's a young boy, Richard Terrera, has developed lion lights. His father has a few cattle. They live adjacent to the Nairobi National Park. So Richard, through some small electrical devices, developed a system of flashing lights which face outward from a kraal. Predators are afraid of those flashing, the moving lights. And so this simple intervention has prevented a lot of lion conflicts in Kenya. So there are systems like that that can be put in place. And when you think about the comment made by Patience and about the thin green line that stems from the General's comments about the thin green line not necessarily being a force of aggression, but the conservation authorities stepping over the boundaries and reaching out to the communities to say, we're aware that we have lions and elephants in our parks that cause a lot of damage to communities. Can we assist by establishing community kraals for the protection of livestock at night? Or can our officials show you how to make chili bricks or chili ropes to prevent elephants from coming into your crops at night? Now, there are a number of interventions. We have to remember, I'm always acutely aware of my pale skin. We have to be aware that many rural communities don't have huge financial resources to throw at these. So to say to them, put up an electric fence or to put up a wire fence boma is not practical. They have to do things within their means, and the park authorities are often in a position to assist them. And, you know, if we think of how many millions of rands in the South African case have gone into the anti-poaching effort in terms of helicopters, vehicles, manpower, boots on the ground, guns, surely we can take a slice of that cake and put it into addressing the conflict in a more humane and community-aware manner. And I think I should stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. Lisa, can we have our last question? Can we have our last question from the chat so that we close? We see that there is a lot of experience that's coming on the table, but we are just coming very close to our time.
Thank you very much, Chair. There is one final question from Rebecca Witte, who says that she agrees with the ownership part. I think many agree with the ownership part. Her understanding is that the approach in Limpopo National Park has not been to support community ownership, instead the resettlement proceeds. Is the feeling that it's too late to shift the approach? So is there a chance to still sort of shift the thinking for Limpopo National Park? Werner?
Can you, sorry, yes. Sorry, just in terms of the thinking, yeah, is there a time still is the question? Sorry, I didn't get the full question.
Yeah, is there still time to like reshift the thinking with regard to community engagement in the Mozambican component of Great Limpopo?
Yeah, no, thank you, Rebecca. Obviously, I can't answer that on behalf of the government of Mozambique. That was the government of Mozambique's decision to start with resettlement and to proclaim the park. But what, and I don't think it will be possible to stop the process now. I think because half of the communities have moved and the other half have not. So you know, that will probably be a very difficult situation for the Mozambican government to resolve. But what has happened is, of course, you know, a vast learning curve by the Mozambican government and the resettlement team in terms of improving the quality of the houses, to improving the access to grazing, improving water distribution, improving irrigation of land. So generally, the you know, over time, the inputs into improving the livelihoods component of that, I think, is not perfect, but it's certainly vastly different and improved than 5 years ago. Ownership in the buffer zones of the community, I mean, obviously through tourism, obviously through initiatives like Herding for Health, and then whatever other means that one could look at. There's a wonderful agriculture project that has been launched now by Karangani Private Game Reserve next to the Masingir Dam, where they've signed a co-management operation agreement for a 14-hectare pivot. and the communities own 40% of the scheme, and the Karangani own 60% of the scheme. So again, there is a very good case study right there next to Mashinjir, which has also looked to be very successful. So there are success stories. So I'm particularly interested in that particular one where we looked at agriculture at scale at a commercial level, and this public-private partnership that emerged from that. Yeah, so that's definitely the direction that we were going. We are engaging with a number of donors to pursue that and to scale that.
Thank you. So we have reached our time, and I would like to thank everyone for the participation in this webinar and ask Lisa to give our final and closing remarks of this webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much all for participating, and also to the presenters and the chair for making this session possible. We will this webinar has been screened to our Facebook profile, and we will also have on actually the TFCA portal, we have the recordings as well as the presentations available. So also at the end of this week, we'll send it to all of that had registered for this webinar. And on Thursday, we'll actually dive a bit deeper into the lessons learned from Malawi-Zambia TFCA with a deep learning session. Malawi-Zambia TFCA is actually very successful also on their LEAP engagement and cross-border collaboration on law enforcement anti-poaching. So if you're interested in this topic and would like to learn more from another part of the SADC region, please tune in on Thursday at 1:30. And then thanks again for joining, and we hope to see you again. If everybody can just put their video on so that we have some faces before we leave and wave goodbye. And then hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay. Good to see you.
Bye.
Somebody is in the bush and has an animal behind. Lisa has an animal behind her. Bye-bye. Okay, I'm leaving, Clara. Bye.